I want to welcome all of our guests today to session 5 of our CXO Cyber series. My name is Terry, and I'll be your host for Without Slowing Down the Business. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. One of the items is technical support. If you have any issues along the way, why don't you shoot that over in a Q&A box? Or if you have problems where you can't work with Zoom, shoot it over in an email to terry@cyvatar.ai. Secondly, we are recording this. The webinar will be made available on our YouTube channel within 24 hours, and we'll also post that up to LinkedIn, so you have a quick link over to there. And thirdly, we have a couple of slides that we're going to show you today, but not very many. So if you're not aware, you can adjust all the Zoom panels up above, and you can make that full screen on your side. So go ahead and do that. If I can get it to advance today, we'll introduce you to all the speakers. Here we go. Our panelists today will be Corey White, who's the founder and CEO of Cyvatar. Also joining us is Sarang Patel. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Contrast Security. Craig Goodwin, the Chief Trust and Risk Officer over at Fujitsu. And Ben Carr, who's a CISO. So gentlemen, I'm gonna pass this over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, Terry. I'll get started, but I will not introduce myself. You can look at LinkedIn or whatever, figure out who I am if you don't know. So I'll skip that and get to the more important people. Saraj, can I give you a background?
Yeah, hey, Corey, thanks for having me. Excited to talk with you all today. I'm Chief Strategy Officer at Contrast Security, and we're a vendor focused on a modern approach to application security, based out of the San Francisco Bay Area.
Perfect, thank you. Great.
Sure, hey everyone. Craig Goodwin, Chief Trust and Risk Officer for Fujitsu. Prior to that, been a CISO for about 20 years or so for US-based tech companies and various other businesses, driving security to outcomes in the most part and working with businesses to make sure that we're delivering security in a really outcome-focused way.
All right, Ben.
Ben Carr, most recently CISO for Aristocrat. Also had roles at Visa, at Nokia globally, led corporate IT security infrastructure for Nokia, and then a bunch of different things in the vendor space. So been in over 25 years.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. All right, let's advance. So for all these webinars and really everything that Cyvatar does, we make sure that we're giving back to the community, especially now with COVID happening right now. And I want to make sure we had a good way of donating back and giving back to the community. And the best way to do that, especially now when people don't have the core basics of just having food, especially children in LA. When I saw that pop up, I knew that was the right charity for us. And so we on a regular basis donate to the food bank in LA, and literally we made a donation yesterday on behalf of one of our customers. They unfortunately had a death in the family, and we were able to instead of sending flowers, which I would normally do, we made a donation in that person's name and loving memory. So those are the types of things that Cyvatar does, and tying that together with our technology partners. And it looks like Frontline Foods. Saraj, you want to tell us a little bit about Frontline Foods and what you guys are doing to support them?
Yeah, obviously we're focused on helping out in any which way we can right now, as well as Contrast and as a community. And so we thought Frontline Foods was a great cause to support with, as it's a recent effort where basically they're buying food from local restaurants and local businesses and delivering them to frontline healthcare workers. And so and they're all regional, which is great. So we ended up donating to the local Southern California, LA-based group that's going to buy some food from some local restaurants, which helps the businesses, and then get it to the frontline healthcare workers. It's a great story to read about their background, where a UCSF nurse, when asked from the community what they could help with, she just said pizza. And so that kind of spawned the whole idea of Frontline Foods and kind of where they're at today.
Oh, that's fantastic. Really appreciate you guys and the contribution. Thank you. Here we go. All right, that's it for the deck. And as you guys know, I love this format where it's us just talking, going through really application security, and I'll kind of get the conversation started here. Yeah, just been, got 15, 20 years, doing different levels of AppSec, selling it, and working with customers to get them secure from an application security perspective. And really the genesis of where all this came from was, I was like, what? AppSec, it's 2020. It's got to be something better. How are we doing this better today? And so I was like, what we have out there? And I remember I was speaking to a good AppSec friend of mine, Rafi, and he's like, nothing's changed. I'm like, really? Come on. Something had to change. And so I started digging around. I found out that there are some changes and there are better ways of doing it. But I'm curious, what do companies do right now? What do CISOs do right now? So Craig, what do you do as a CISO? And then, you've been your next, what have you done in the past and how do you approach it in the past?
Well, so where to start? To your point, Corey, it's a hell of a range of tools out there, and they're all different places, right? I think for a CISO, the challenge is going to be like many of these other webinars that we've talked about, is that a lot of solutions tend to solve a spot problem, right? And if you think about an application, you're thinking about all layers there as well, right? So you're thinking about the infrastructure upon which it operates, you're thinking about the application itself and the coding and the development, and then you're thinking about all the pipelines that begin that process to get the build together in the final place and out to the live environment. So there's just such a range of different risks originating from so many different places that trying to cobble together all those vendors, and we talk about it at length, there's thousands and thousands of different vendors out there, and there's even thousands and thousands of vendors in the app space. So trying to navigate that environment and work out which of those application areas, whether it be layer or whether it even be which application, because having worked in large organizations, there's hundreds and hundreds of applications in the business. So focusing on which ones you want to work with and what part of the application you want to work with is incredibly difficult. Another thing that I've always grappled with, and I think when I speak to my peers, they grapple with, is where the hell do you start, right? So you've got loads of apps out there already. Do you start in the live environment where the real risks are, or do you start in the pipeline from the portfolio perspective and try and move yourself left in the development lifecycle and stop the bleeding, as I would call it, right? So do you stop the problems promulgating themselves, or do you solve the problems you've got right now? And like we've talked about over the last few weeks, budget isn't unending, resources aren't unlimited. And as a CISO, you've got to decide where you focus your efforts. So I think the biggest problem is which tools, which applications, and what part of the development process do you even start with? So that's where I'd start, I think.
Yeah, Craig, I think I would echo a lot of what you said there. I think, when I look at AppSec as a problem, where do you find a solution for it? It's not an easy answer, right? Because we talk about it like, oh, there's just an AppSec solution. Like, let's go buy a product that solves AppSec, and it's really not a product-based solution. That's part of the issue. It spans so much of a pipeline, right? From everything from the instantiation of a product to having somebody who's in security who's involved in that instantiation to make sure that as the product's heading into a pipeline, that they're using the right methodology and the right direction on where they're going to go from a configuration and standards model to actual, as that code's being developed, to make sure that there's some type of testing that happens so it's coming out of the pipeline in a secure manner, to then when it's going into production, which is usually a completely different side, right, to make sure that as it's in production, you're coming back and addressing that issue. And I think, we talk a lot about DevOps and DevSecOps, and when you end up in that environment, I think that's a transition that a lot of companies haven't come to grips with, because what's happened is the app teams have traditionally said, you know what, we want to move to this agile fast method that's going to allow us to respond and implement quickly, the whole Silicon Valley fail fast methodology, right? But then when you actually do that, they're doing that in an absence of controls in a lot of cases. And so where I see, a big failure, I think, is companies, approaching it from one of two sides, either saying we're going to let the developers do whatever they want, and then you end up with the problem of trying to corral a security solution that works with N+1 number of different technologies and pipeline developments that people are using, or you're going to try to streamline it, and then that ends up constraints on developers, right? I'm a firm believer in really trying to bring it back to the, I guess, the infancy of the whole problem, and that's education and training. And I don't think we're doing a good job of doing that. I think, you know, training has been kind of and also ran in the security space. It's something that nobody really wants to do, but we have to do. And we haven't found interesting and unique ways to get that training and education and advocacy out that I think would pay a lot of benefits in the downstream process. So sorry, I went off a little bit on a lot of stuff there, but
that's perfect. That's what this is about. So, you know, Srag, I mean, our CISOs are saying that, you know, it's not a product, you know, issue. It's a process, you know, political, cultural, educational issue. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And a couple of things, I agree with some of what Ben said, but actually I disagree in some ways as well. You know, what I would say is, generally speaking, what we hear, and it sounds like a lot of what both Ben and Chris and Craig said, is that, you know, we hear from customers all the time. These are big enterprises to small companies. You know, they ask me all the time, do I fix the stuff that's out there that could put me on the front page of the newspaper tomorrow, or do I make sure that next project I'm working on is going to go out the door safe? And they ask us all the time, where would I start? And I said, look, I can help you make the case either way. I'm happy to justify either which way, and they both make sense. And I think part of that is actually fundamental to the way that we've thought about the problem. And at Contrast, we really do think about the notion of like DevOps. Truly, if you think about the mentality, is like you need to ship good software, sure, and that's done through education and done through better tooling and all the other stuff. But you still need to run what you've built is out there running securely, right? You can't. I challenge other vendors. I have a lot of good friends and many other vendors. I ask them all the time. You say you help with DevSecOps. What do you do for dev, for the companies that do only ops security? And if the ones who do only dev security will only help you write better software, so how do you help ops? It's not like, don't tell me you help in DevSecOps if you only do one or the other. It's just not true. And I think like part of that comes down to weaving into the way that, you know, I think as both Ben and Craig said, we got to weave into the way the business drives. Like, you know, we are here to enable the business to drive our outcomes that we want. We can't be in the way. Now we got to make sure we're not putting ourselves at risk. Of course, that's our job, but we got to do that in a way that enables the business to grow and accelerate, not slow down and stop. Right? We're not the gate checkers at the very end. And so, you know, what I would say is like I agree a lot with actually the educational process piece, but the way that and I think maybe you're saying the same thing, Ben, is like part of that is actually not just traditional education as we've always thought about. Like, I'm going to go stick these 5,000 developers in a room for 8 hours and hope that they're going to absorb something. That we know that doesn't generally work.
Yeah.
But if we give them nuggets of information when it's very contextual, like I'm writing some code and right then and there I made a mistake. Tell me, wait, first of all, accurately, don't give me shitty data because that's useless and you're going to lose your trust like that. Give me insightful data that tells me exactly the mistake I made and why I made a mistake and how I would fix it without having to know a whole bunch of stuff about security, right? And then it becomes a very positive momentum. You're giving them training on the fly, which is much better received and much better digested, that accelerates the momentum that we all want to drive for, right?
Yeah, and I would agree with that. That's kind of where I was alluding to, maybe perceived the wrong way, was I think there's two pieces. One is on the front side. There is, I think, some core training and education that needs to be done, right? So people are understanding basically what the guardrails are. What's the policy and the guidelines that we're architecting to? But then I completely agree with you. The whole method of going into this pipeline CI/CD process, right, is you have to evolve your training to match that process. Like if you try to apply an old waterfall type training methodology to a pipeline agile method, it's going to be very frustrating for the people in that pipeline developing, right? You got to make it flexible. You got to make it pertinent and relevant at the time that they need it, as opposed to them trying to remember what they need to do.
Yeah, and I think you've lost the battle already. I think to challenge both of those points, I think if you say DevSecOps or you say training, I think you've already lost the battle, right? I think you need to be influencing that. You need to be saying, you know, it's DevOps. It is DevOps, right? And security is a fundamental part of that, right? Whether it's quality or security, it's got to be transparent. Now, I'm being slightly flippant because I want to cause arguments, but the reality is you've got to be that transparent. It's got to be that embedded. It's got to be that deep within the developer's psyche that actually you're giving them the opportunity to do it themselves and bake it in, right? So if you start having to put sec in the middle of DevOps, you've lost already. If you start having to tell them they've got to do training, you've lost already, right? You've got to allow them to come to those conclusions, allow them to realize from the top down or from the bottom up, it doesn't matter, that what they're building is quality software and security is a part of that. And I think we don't give the development community enough credence, right? I think there's a lot of security people out there that say, we know the right answers, right? We know the right answers, you don't. And that's the premise you start from, right? Rather than saying, you're doing a hell of a lot of good stuff here. Why don't we take what you're doing and try and fit security into it? And I think if you get that mentality when you start, you're onto a winner.
Yeah, I agree. I say this all the time. Like you said, we don't call dev performance ops or dev quality ops. We don't have those terms. Why? Why? They're just not. It's just given. When I write software, when we build software, it's expected to be performant and high quality and secure. That's just part of the requirement. And we got to weave into that process. Like, if we're trying to enable DevOps for sake of speed and scalability and mentality, then great, let's do that. And let's make sure that we, the security teams, learn from how DevOps wants to operate and how they will operate, and make sure that we're weaving in the appropriate, I guess being the key word, balances and capabilities to make sure that we are mitigating risk.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Corey.
Yeah. I think the challenge, and I'm taking a step back here a little bit, I think we've failed as a cybersecurity community as it relates to application security, and probably other areas as well, but application security specifically, because let's just say DevOps, take the sec part out of it, wherever you put it, but just DevOps has moved faster than AppSec. And so the evolution of application security has, to me, still been left in the dark ages of 2005, maybe 2010, if we're lucky. And so that being said, maybe you guys at Contrast have something way, way better, but I don't think the vast majority of companies that have agile deployments and they're moving quickly, they have any idea. And I just think that's where we're falling down, is that DevOps moves faster and application security is still in the dark ages.
Well, and to your point, Corey, when you're talking about larger organizations as well, you don't just have one, right? And
it's a bunch of different pipelines.
You see, an organization isn't just made up of one of those agile waterfall mentalities. It's not made up of one coding language. It's not made up of one type of application, right? So actually, as a CISO, you're fighting this losing battle because you're sat there going, all right, I can buy this one product to solve this one spot problem, but actually I need 50 of them to cover my entire estate, and therefore we're never going to catch up with that. So it's a tough job.
I think there's an underlying issue that we don't talk enough about, and it's not just an AppSec issue. It's across security, right? In different areas, and it manifests itself in different ways at different companies and different industries. But you mentioned an interesting point about not talking about quality and performance as part of the development methodology, right? Because it's just assumed that it's there. And I think, if you look across the industry, a lot of the things we run into as security professionals, where I find challenging in the CISO role, I would say it's tone at the top. It's the methodology and the thought process of how security is seen at a company isn't embedded. And so we don't talk about quality as part of the development process because it's an assumed requirement that has to be there, right?
Correct.
The challenge is, going back 20, 30 years, it's not, security wasn't an assumed part of the output of the process, right? So how many applications do we talk about that are, somewhat legacy, and we say, well, wait, they weren't designed with security in mind. Well, why, right? I mean, security is something that we need to think about as a core fundamental tenet of the organization. Right? I mean, there's different levels of risk. I would certainly advocate for that, where, one company's risk tolerance or the sensitivity in an application of the data might not be the same as another. But I think we all need to realize, and that's something that needs to be bred into the DNA of a company, is that the right risk tolerance, the right security controls, the right security mindset, and that will pay amazing dividends in developers realizing that there's a certain expectation on the output of the dev process. And I think you'll see a lot more of a pull instead of a push from security, right?
Yeah.
That pull is important. When you start seeing that pull, you know your program is working in whatever area it is, right? When you start getting asked to help, that's when you're meeting with success.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ben, but let me ask you from a CISO perspective, which is like a bigger issue. I think that's why a lot of CISOs, I hate to say it this way, I'm not a CISO and you guys can pounce on me, but why CISOs are failing and the turnover rate is 18 to 24 months is because what you just said, Ben, is that they don't build that relationship from the very beginning and embed security into the functions of the business. Some kind of way they're losing that battle, and that applies to application security. Really, in particular, that's probably one of the hardest battles to win.
Yeah, I mean, you picked at an interesting point that I think leads off into a bunch of other topics. But for me, look at the reporting structures of security professionals. Where do they report, right? It's typically up into IT, right? And so it's a conflict of interest, right? When you're reporting up into IT, you're calling out problems in the organization that you ultimately report up through, or the CFO, or the CTO. We need to elevate that position, that understanding, that responsibility to a business level concern, and that as a business level concern, it sits outside of those areas. It's either through risk for me, like as a chief risk officer, or it should be direct to the CEO or have at least a dotted line. And if you look at many organizations, we just haven't elevated the maturity to meet that target, right? And I think that's where we need to get to. Now, there's a lot of steps between then, right? So what do you do if you're a CISO and you don't have that? What if you do if you're an organization that has those challenges? I think you have to figure out how to connect with the business on a business level and drive business level outcomes. If we keep talking about number of vulnerabilities, probability of issues, you have to fix this now because it's going to cause a problem, we're going to get hacked, you're not talking about business level issues, right? And I think elevating that discussion, being understanding enough to have that discussion, that's where it needs to go. I mean, Craig, do you see it the same way, or do you
Yeah, Craig.
I don't even know where to start on that conversation, man. Which bit, right? I think, no, I agree. I agree. So I would agree with the concept of it being incredibly important about where it sits in the business, right? So I don't agree with the organizational conversation about where it sits in the business necessarily. I think a good CISO, I think a good business professional, depending on the organization, I know there's loads of constraints and I'm summing up massively here, can be successful in a lot of different places, right? I don't think that should be the ultimate factor as to whether you succeed or fail. I think it's an important factor. I don't think it's the ultimate factor. But I agree with you. I think the focus that the business puts on security should be one of the first questions. And we said it in the last one, Corey, I think. When I go to an interview for a CISO role, or when someone starts a CISO role, the first conversation they should have is that one about culture and how much buy-in there is from the organization. The second one is about finances, right? Because that's what backs it up. Like, go talk to your CFO and agree on what the expectations are, right?
Yeah, what's the commitment?
Yeah, correct. Agree those things, right? Because if you don't do that up front and loads of people avoid it, you end up in this horrible black hole where you're fighting a losing battle from day one, you know?
I would just tweak it a bit to say that commitment is more than just finances though, right? Like, I think a lot of people focus on finances too much, and you could have the commitment on finances, but if you don't have the commitment of the business to want to have that culture, then I think that results in conflict. So, but generally, yeah, I agree with what you were saying.
Put your money where your mouth is. So I want to challenge Sarag on one point. I think he avoided.
Yeah, wait, I was going to do the same challenge. Let me do my challenge. I want to hear what your challenge is, and then Sarag, you got to answer both.
Yeah, I want to challenge Sarag. So he avoided the question a little bit. So we talked about, I think one of the biggest challenges day one for a CISO from AppSec is where do you start, right? Front end or back end? I've got all these risks that are out there. I want to fix the development pipeline, right? And you brushed over that and avoided it really quickly, Sarag, saying you can do all of it, right? But I think I'd like to know what you see, right? So where is the most success? Because ultimately, me and Ben and everyone else want to solve both those problems, right? We want to get to the epitome of that model where, yes, we're shipping really good code and we've got really good code like out in the operational environment, but it's tough to get there. Do you see success between those models?
Yeah, it's the same question. I'm going to say mine a little differently. So, bottom line, Sarag, who's buying your product? Yeah. I mean, you got CISOs that are too low in the organization to really influence it. you've got the developers that don't care about security because it's not embedded in. So
We've got no money.
It's a great question. Look. Here's what I would say. Look, and I'm biased, of course, but I think my perspective is this: if I was in it's easier said than done. But if I was in Craig's or Ben's seat here, what I would likely do is I want to make sure I'm not digging my organization into a deeper and deeper hole every day. Because where are we spending? We're spending, I don't know, 70% of our dollars on IT investment for the future, not for the past. We're spending for the future. What are we building for next? So I personally would invest my money in making sure that what I'm shipping tomorrow is good. So I'm weaving into that process. Now, that doesn't mean that all the stuff I have out there that's driving my revenue today is left out to dry, right? Or left out to kind of fend for itself. Now, we have security controls in place. We have mitigating controls in place. I would make sure I have controls there, controls that you're comfortable with, controls that enable you to sleep well at night. But what I would be investing in primarily is like, I'm shipping new software every day. I'm shipping software tomorrow and next week and the week after. I got to make sure that I'm not digging my organization to a deeper and deeper hole every day. So I would probably start there, and doing that would take a lot. We all talked about earlier. Look, I'll use a non-technical analogy here. 10 years ago, we used to have tire pressure gauges. Remember those things that we would use for our cars to be specialized tools? They're specialized tools that required us to train people on how to use one of these specialized tools. They would need to know to stop and check. If they just sat in their glove compartment box all day long, it did no good for the company, right? They would have to use this thing. And imagine today, if we try to empower 5,000 trucks, let's just say a fleet of trucks, to be able to manage their tire pressure by a specialty gauge that they would have to check every single time, it's useless. It's a lost cause. There's no way that's going to happen, right? We can train them all we want. It's never going to happen. What do? It's quite simple. Technology can actually help us sometimes. In this case, we put 4 sensors in the trucks. I can sit at my desk and I can look at a fleet of 5,000 trucks and check their tire pressure like that. I couldn't do that 10 years ago, right? And that mentality is a big part of kind of how we think, like, how can we build technology to work that way? Forget the specialized tool that's inaccurate and doesn't tell me how to fix it. Like today, I have a little sensor in a tire that'll tell me, hey, you have a problem, without me ever asking it. Here's where the problem is, and here's how to fix it. It's quite simple, right? It's just a change of mentality, to be honest, from a technology perspective. They're both technology. A gauge and a sensor are both technology, but the process can be very different if we weave it in the right ways, right?
I agree with that. Back to the question: who buys your products, Rod?
So for us, it was there, but you're right to answer it. Our champions generally, at contrast, are actually development teams, DevOps leaders, app owners. Those are generally our champions. Now, the money almost always will still come from the security organization, right? You guys get to have the hard conversation with the CFO on who gets the money. And so the money generally comes from there. The contracts are almost always signed by an Infosec team or security team, but they're not usually our champions. The champions are actually the people who are trying to accelerate software delivery, trying to make sure that they don't get called in the middle of the night when something happens. Those are the folks who are usually championing us through an organization.
So no, that's a great point. So you're saying that you got to find, the niche, which I think, it's out there for sure, but the niche of the developers that are security aware, or either they've been through an incident and, like you said, been called in the middle of the night because their code is not secure, and then had to go and redo things sometimes from the very beginning. And so someone had to have gone through the pain or have some kind of security knowledge to know, let's get this right for the first time. And then security has the backing. Is that the scenario you typically see?
That's one. The other one, that's exactly one. The second one is, and this is probably more common, developers are like working on a big project. I got this new, app I'm working on. It's the new digital transformation, virtual banking experience. Okay, great. I've got this thing. It's due on June 1st. We're shipping that thing on June 1st because of business planning, blah, blah, blah. On May 15th, the security team comes back and says, no, you can't ship that thing because I found these 5 problems. When they've been working on it for 6 months and now all of a sudden they're ready to go and the security team tells them they can't ship it, that burns these teams. Like they're working hard to get this stuff out the door, and then they're told at the very end that they can't get it out the door because of something that should have been told to them 4 months earlier, right? They wrote that code 4 months ago. So I think that's the
shift left conversation, right? That's the conversation as a CISO we're trying to have with the dev teams is like, look, it's less costly, it's less impactful, it makes financial sense. your teams don't get sidelined or don't get frustrated because they can't meet these deadlines. We try to do that everywhere, man. It's even on the infrastructure side. It's the same thing for vulnerabilities, right? Fix it in the gold image. Don't fix it when you have 1,000 of them deployed. So anytime we can shift left, that's a financial and operational win.
That's right. And that's where you can actually, win over, we all want to win over the hearts of the developers and our peers. And that's the way you can do that. Now, we still have to obviously have our risk controls in place and be confident ourselves, but I think that's the way that we get there.
Well, and it's about adapting to your environment, isn't it? It's about having strong emotional intelligence, having strong business and people skills to be able to understand when and where, right? So for example, I've been in organizations where multiple teams of developers building multiple products. Some teams are really comfortable with asking you to tell them what to do. Some teams of developers want you to go, right, I want you to use contrast, I want you to use it like this, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z, right? And they're very comfortable with that scenario. Whereas other development teams and development leaders will say, absolutely do not tell me what to do. Tell me what you need me to do and I'll go away and select the tool, to your point, Sarag, right? And they'll want to go and select the tool. And then you just stand on the sideline and go, look, as long as you're doing these things, we're good with this, And I think it's using that emotional intelligence and business knowledge to know when to go overstep your reach and tell them, and when to sit back and say, yeah, you're doing a good job, I'll allow you to do it,
Yeah, and that's where like, what I've heard a lot of, or not a lot of, actually, one very notable CISO at a large financial kind of told me, he's like, look, what we're working on is in this new world of digital transformation, accelerated software, large portfolios, the N+1 problem of different environments and processes. What they're working through is, let's just redefine between myself and my peer who's responsible to get software out the door. What are the new non-negotiables? Meaning, from my perspective, meaning the security perspective, what is a non-negotiable? I don't know. You can't ship software that has a critical vulnerability. Okay, fine. From the development team's perspective, what is non-negotiable? You can't tell me the day before I'm going to ship there's a problem. You've got to tell me earlier on. And they're just redefining, like, with a summarized quick of 4, 5, 10 bullets of, like, these are the non-negotiables. If we plan around that, then guess what? A lot of the friction points, the red tape that we've all put in place over decades can actually be minimized. And we're actually not putting our companies at higher risk than ever before. We're actually not. That's the fallacy. And I think it's just like, by defining the most important elements between us and our peers,
I think that's a great bit of advice as well, because you mentioned like criteria, and I think too many CISOs jump too quickly to putting those hard gates in, right? So there's a real opportunity. So you can define criteria, that's absolutely fine. You can define success and failure criteria. But if you're new into a business that's been around for, let's make it up, 10, 20 years and has a lot of legacy technology debt, has a lot of risk debt, well, then actually you can define those criteria and just have that as a visibility tool rather than a hard gate tool, right? So to your point, if you just say, well, what we were going to do in the future is say no critical vulnerabilities, we're going to implement that and monitor that now so we understand what that looks like, right? But we don't necessarily fix it and stop you shipping code today. That then gives you that data and visibility to have a real credible conversation with the development teams, with your various business stakeholders to say, look, real life, that's what it looks like. It's not just Craig spreading fear, uncertainty, and doubt. That's what you're shipping today. Probably we should do something about this, and you help them to get to the right answer.
That's right.
Yep, I agree. So what I've found, here, Savitar, just in the last, few months, I've had to go and let me figure out from how can we solve the problem of AppSec? And again, I like to speak grand. Yeah, let's solve the problem of AppSec, which is probably pretty damn impossible. But I do believe in making the impossible possible. But here's the deal. What I found is, like myself, many CISOs, they aren't AppSec, experts. They aren't developers, don't have a development background. And so, at the end of the day, they just want, hey, we just need this thing secured. But then what you find out, what I've heard in this conversation, and I've also verified, is that, there's no, one-stop shop. You can't buy, hey, I bought this product and now it solves everything. And what I found, and what we built over at Savitar now is a combination of, sometimes you actually have to do manual testing. Sometimes it has to be interviews. Sometimes it has to be manual, threat models, so on and so forth. but for some applications, it makes sense to use contrast, and others it makes sense to tie in, I don't know, Burp Suite and do manual testing. So it ended up being a combination. But what we had to do is jump in and talk to the CISO, understand what their kind of requirements are, and talk to kind of lead development, whoever leads the development team, understand what their issues are and what their applications, what versions of code, so on and so forth, it works on, and then build a custom solution. And not saying that solves it, but it gives us the ability to take the best of breed products, best of and services, and tie that into a continuous solution. And so that's kind of how we've looked at it. But I'm curious, is that crazy from asking the CISOs out there? Does that make sense? And even you, Siraj, I mean, I know your product isn't a one size fits all. Does that even make sense as an approach?
Well, maybe I'll start with just a vendor perspective, and then we can fill in. Is like from a vendor side, our purpose, and as we think about it, like we want to be focused on making sure we solve real problems, not just kind of talk about a bunch of stuff and don't solve anything. And so the goal being, we want to make sure like where we focus and where we emphasize as a vendor, we're actually solving some real problems, right? Wholesale, right? Like and so for us, like, to be honest, like in the world of AppSec, at least in some approaches that we take at Contrast, it's highly language dependent. So we focus on a specific set of languages. Now we are confident it's a big portion of most folks' portfolio, but you're right, we're not going to have support, at least today, for things like embedded hardware systems in your medical devices, perhaps at Fujitsu or whatever it might be, right? We don't do that. And so you're right, that's where a portfolio for someone like Craig is looking at, I don't know how many tens of thousands of applications or maybe thousands of applications. You can knock off big chunks. Like, you can take all your 90% of your critical web applications and Contrast can help you there, right? Great. But then you're still going to have a couple other solutions, I'm sure, to be able to talk about, especially multifunctional organizations like Fujitsu is a perfect example. I think that's true, and that's going to be the case in most cases. And it's kind of consistent. What makes our lives hard in a very distinct world where there's all kinds of different snowflakes, if I may. We use this internally all the time. Every application is a snowflake in some way, shape, or form. But I think that is very true, is what makes our life challenging and why technology is hard, because there's no one way of doing it. It's really quick.
Yeah, I think it's really a focus of, like, if you think about AppSec versus a lot of other areas in the security space, vulnerability management. Well, there's 3 or 4 main vendors, right? And you can pick any one of those, and it's pretty much a ubiquitous thing. Like, it's not going to matter too much. Everybody has their own specific reasons they like one thing over another, or integrations. But as far as actually doing the work, they're very similar, right? When you get to the AppSec side, as Siraj mentioned, I think it's more of a human problem, because it's humans developing code, and each person is going to have their own preferences, their desires, their unique way that they do that, the languages they choose, the dev pipeline that they want to implement. And so, even in a very small company, you could have multiple different pipelines with multiple different preferences of how that's implemented, and one solution is not going to fit all. So it's really trying to figure out, how do you implement at scale for, as you put it, snowflakes? How do you try to figure out to meet that best need, right?
Yeah, and I think the enablement piece there, I was talking to a load of cyber startups earlier in the week, and I think the enablement piece there and how the vendor community can come together to help CISOs is in their commercial models, right? And is the way they approach the market, like what Corey's doing with Cybertar and trying to drive those outcomes. Actually, what you're going to need in the future, I think, is a real big range of tools. Gone are the days when you could just pick one tool to do your infrastructure and one tool to do your applications, and you had 6 or 7 tools and we're good as a CISO. As technologies promulgate, as so many competitors come into the market, whether it's cloud versus on-prem, it's just going to get more and more complex. So as a CISO, you need that tool bag, you need that collection of tools to suit which particular context you're working with, particularly in large organizations like mine, where there's a billion different technologies and a billion different scenarios. So for vendors to help you to do that, to partner with a CISO, to help them to find those use cases, not be perturbed when, you know, I'm not going to spend my entire security budget on an MSP with one security provider, and actually find someone that's going to help me to drive individual outcomes on spot solutions and see that as a benefit to the end organization, you know?
Yeah, and I think that's the key. You have to, one of the goals that we have, and that's why, you know, the council of, you know, folks like yourself, you know, Ben and Craig, you know, to Savitar is, you know, there's so many, you know, facets to AppSec. You know, it's API security. It is, you know, like you said, you know, depending on what application, what languages you're using, how you manage that. So all these individual components. And what we're trying to do here is, and contrast is a huge part of it, is figure out what is that full tool bag that someone would need, plus the actual application security expert to kind of oversee that process and know, oh, okay, contrast plugs in here, you know, API security plugs in here, and so on and so forth, so that we can actually figure out and solve it. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I think CISOs have.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you know, CISOs, like the other big challenge is that they're playing whack-a-mole, right? Like every day, just like a product manager, there's a prioritized list of like, where's my biggest risk? Let's go knock that off. And so I'm sure, and I'll speak maybe on your behalf, you can keep me honest here, is that you're not generally saying like, let's just solve AppSec period hard stop. You're kind of saying, okay, I've got these 10 new projects coming out the door that are big, I don't know, mobile apps or some big new virtual banking, whatever it is. And you're like, okay, that's a big one. Let me make sure I solve AppSec for that, or those 4 or 5 projects, or whatever it might be, or that BU maybe. Great, I knocked that off the list. Now let's move on to the next one. And then you're kind of going through this whack-a-mole type game. And so generally, as I'm assuming, as you go through that process, you're picking the appropriate solution, either process.
Yeah, it's a risk analysis, right? Everything's a risk. Everything really needs to be a risk approach, and I think you know, people overuse that sometimes, but it's really true. Is that you need to figure out where the risks are, and the biggest risks are what you hit first. I mean, your inside-outside question. Yeah, you don't want to add to the backlog of issues that you already have, so that's a good place to start. But I'm also looking at the things in production where there's a huge amount of risk, and I tackle those in alliance with everything else, right? Budget, resources, trying to make sure I'm assigning that scarcity to the most important thing first.
Yeah, and I really didn't want to feel like I was attacking Surag earlier, but that was the question I really wanted to ask was, you know, what you articulate, Surag, is absolutely, you know, I'm going through that now with Fujitsu actually, and we go through it every time we do a job, right? As we look at that very problem of one end or the other, and actually what you're saying goes against traditional risk, right? And I'm not saying that's not right. We all need to evolve. If that's the right way to go, then that's fantastic in terms of what we see from the data and the output. But actually, traditional risk calculations would say, well, Jesus, all my revenue is on that one particular product that's out in the live environment now, right? And I make those risk calculations and I go, well, screw that little API-based platform that actually might make money or might not make money. It's out there and it's in the wild, and that's scaring me today and keeping me up at night, you know? So it just, I don't need an answer. I just think it articulates that balance, right?
And I think part of that discussion is, you know, again, it gets back to that business awareness, making the business aware of what the risk is. Yeah. And there's a certain percentage of that dev cycle that's got to be break, fix, BAU stuff, right? So if the app breaks in production, they're going to go spend some time to fix that, and that's an understood, right? Yeah. They need to understand that you know, if there's a vulnerability or a problem that comes up that we find in production, and I think that's generally more of the security team's discovery, right? On the right side, it's the security team finds that in production, and we ask the dev teams to fix it. Where if you go to the left side and it's, you know, the dev team in pipeline, I want to enable them with security tools, right? To be able to find stuff themselves, and as opposed to coming back and being a very intermittent stop-start process with dev and security. And so I think it's understanding what the balance is, understanding how you allocate the resources.
Yeah, and then just to finish that point off real quick, Corey, I think just on Surag's thing, just really quick, I'll be really quick, I promise. A great point that Surag made was, I think the opportunity for CISOs here and the recommendation from CISOs here is grab the opportunity where you can. And I think Surag made a great point, right? You've got to justify it with means other than security sometimes. So if you've got a new initiative that's going out with a really big focus from the executive, it's the future of the company, use that to get it through the door, right? Use that to get the tool or the control through the door and then feed backwards. So I would say, grab your opportunities where you can, wherever they exist in the pipeline.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, the point I was just gonna make, similar to what you guys just made, is here's the deal though. I have seen actually many organizations, and I'm curious what you guys think. What percentage of organizations to where you literally have competing factions, security and the developers hate each other. They're like at each other's throat, and it's just, you can't get over that. What percentage of companies have that challenge? And I'm gonna throw out maybe at least half at some level.
Right. 100% of the companies that I've been in, Corey, the developers love the security team. So I don't know what the I don't know what it is, but
yes, I mean,
shameless
you
plug for Craig.
And Candyland. Yeah, I love it. Yes, that's your world.
You
Yeah,
know, like Corey, I would say, like, we see it a lot, and it's one of those things. I was thinking about this. In our internal organization, our compliance officer kind of said something along the lines of last week, like, I found this amazing tool for the annual sexual harassment training we have to all take as a company, right? It's like, instead of doing 2 hours a year, we can give 5-minute increments every month. I was like, oh, that sounds great. Everyone will absorb more and it works out well. And she was like, oh, great, let's roll this out. And I said, wait, but let me ask you a question. When we roll that out, that means we get to remove that 2-hour requirement, right? That one shot thing. And she's like, no, we're going to have both. I was like, wait, pause, stop the train. We're not helping each other out here, because we're kind of saying, like, look, we'll work with the development teams, the security team, but you still must keep doing that antiquated thing that we've always done, because I'm not yet comfortable removing that. Why would anyone take on additional work? I think that's just like, as we think about it, we got to just be realistic with ourselves and with the development peers. And that's what I've seen in a lot of organizations. Security teams are like, I'm trying to do what's nice for the development team. And I'm sure Craig and Ben don't do this. But then on the flip side, they're like, no, you must keep doing that thing we've been doing for 15 years, because we've been doing it for 15 years. And I think that's a big part of why do we see that friction? It's obvious, because we're not really, there's a lack of empathy, I think, in many cases.
Well, that's where I really, really quickly distance myself from the compliance team and say, they do compliance, I do security, and then you play the good cop, bad cop, and you can help them out as well.
So you just throw compliance under the bus.
Yeah, absolutely. That's their job.
That is a winning strategy. Trust me. That is a winning strategy. Do that as well.
Okay. That's awesome. I think most of you folks probably saw that we're open up for questions. Obviously, we can go on and on for a while here, but I wanted to make sure I made that statement. Anyway, so Sarah, can you talk about how, kind of background of contrast, how have you guys solved it? Now, I like to use big words because I believe everything is possible. But how have you solved it? You solved AppSec, right? How'd you do it?
Well, I would love to think we've solved AppSec for the areas where we work. Like, look, I would love to tell you we've got a genius group of 300 odd employees, and we're just cranking it out. And I'm sure that's a big part of it. But to be honest, we learn based on what's happening. We're learning from history, to be honest. Like, what we are applying here is honestly, in many ways, what has happened in performance, software performance 10 years ago. There was a renaissance in software performance about 10 years ago. Many of us who've been in software for a long time will recall, before the recent approaches like application performance, the app dynamics and New Relics and the Dynatraces and the Microsoft App Insights came around. Guess what we used to do 10 years ago? We used to statically scan code, just like we do in AppSec today. We used to do black box testing. We used to hit the app every 5 seconds and see how fast it responds for performance reasons. And today we don't do a lot of that. And we still do it for specific use cases or areas, but for the bulk of our business, guess what we do? We put sensors in our software and it tells us when there's a performance problem during development and during production. It's actually very natural. And so what we're doing is that we're saying, how can we apply what we're doing for modern software and other facets of software to security, to AppSec here? And lucky for all of us is we don't actually have to reinvent a whole lot of new stuff. Now, we're unique in AppSec, of course, but from a macro software perspective, we're actually just learning from the past and applying that to software security.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. You want to talk for a minute about how the evolution of coming from hey, the OWASP top 10, which everybody's like, we are complying with OWASP top 10. Maybe in 2020 that doesn't actually hit the mark, and how some of your founders have evolved from the OWASP top 10 to what is that next level?
It's funny, like some folks may know, like one of the founders of Contrast is actually the original author of the OWASP Top 10. I don't know how many years ago, 17 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was, a long time ago. If you ask him about that list, it'll frustrate the hell out of him. And the reason it frustrates him is because today, I don't know, 15 years later, it's the same thing. It's effectively the same exact list as it was 15 years ago. And the whole point of highlighting these are the top 10 was ideally so we could eradicate the top 4 or 5 over time, at least over 15 years, but we haven't. And so that's honestly like a lot of the genesis behind contrast. And the point is like, look, we've been at this for 20 years. We've had things like the OWASP top 10, and still we're talking about the same top 10, effectively the same. Now they've changed orders a little bit here and there, but we're talking about effectively the same top 10 for almost the last 15 to 17 years. And so part of that is we have to try things a little differently. And software we know is proliferating, and all that will continue happening. But how can we think about people, process, technology, a little bit, all of it together? It's not just a technology solution for everything, of course, but how are we applying intelligent modern technology to decades old problems that are only getting bigger and bigger every day today because we're writing more software, right? So,
why do you think we've got that problem then, Chirag? So they're there, they're visible. Your co-founder helped to write them, so it's not like they're a secret. So why is it we're still not solving them?
I think I can selfishly say it's just because we've had a whole bunch of kind of manual specialized tools that weren't scalable, and I really do think that's a big piece of the problem. But at the same time, if everything was a constant, if we were writing the same amount of software today as we were writing 15 years ago, maybe things would actually be different. Maybe we actually would have taken a big chunk out of some of those problems. But we know, like today, we deliver, I don't know, 100 times, maybe 1,000 times more software than we did 10 years ago. It's growing at an exponential pace. Yeah. And so the problem is growing faster than the security is changing. And so I think that's just natural.
It's natural, but it's a cultural thing. And I'll take responsibility, running, security consulting organizations for forever. Whereas, I remember getting excited when my AppSec guys, come back and like, Corey, excuse my friends, I hacked the shit out of that application. I was able to make it do things it should not have been able to do. And that's cool as hell. But at the same time, I never in the past, and I'm trying to, we're changing that with Savitar, had somebody saying, I secured the shit out of that application. You know what I mean? I made it, not do a transaction it shouldn't done. I couldn't escalate privileges anymore. You know what I mean? The same level of excitement should exist, but it's a cultural thing within cybersecurity that makes that a huge problem for us.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely.
Yeah, and I think we definitely have to change that. We got to get into, remediation needs to be sexy. Right? Where's the t-shirt that says that?
I patched the shit out of that server.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, all the honeys need to come to the guy that has I patched the shit out of that server. That needs to happen. Not. It's
funny, Corey. I'm going to come back to you. We've actually been brainstorming ideas like that internally. How can we build a little grassroots, campaign within the developer community around they care about security? Because it bugs me to know when people say, "Oh, developers don't care about security." And I say bullshit.
Well, that annoys me as well, because I think we went through a process. I spoke about it when I was talking to someone else the other day about recruiting people into the security army. Right it's really attractive. Cybersecurity on your CV, the ability to be good at cybersecurity developer, whatever it is incredibly attractive. So CISOs should be using that, right? So forget pushing your security resources out to dev and get those dev guys excited about getting some experience in the sec team, right? Because they love it. They want to do it, right? To Corey's point, start throwing around pen testing and hacking, and those dev guys love it. That's their language, right?
They want to do it. Just give
you got to build an effective security champions program and get people in dev who actually their primary function is dev actually to want to be part of security.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, sorry, I was getting so excited. Do we have any questions? I'll make sure that I didn't miss anything.
We do have a couple of questions. First of all, I have an anonymous one here, so I can't make you live, but where do CISOs look for information when you want to learn more about application security landscape? Is that compliance frameworks, peers, analysts, publications, OWASP?
Ben, you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a certain amount that just comes up when you're seeing things happen, right? Seeing what's kind of top of mind, top of news. I think ultimately you have to stay in touch with your dev organization, right? So if you're dev, again, to back to the point we talked about before, if there's something going on in AppSec and it's not related to anything your team or organization using in AppSec, it's going to kind of fall on deaf ears. So where I try to stay in touch with is actually our development community, our developers that are actually in the org, and find out where they're getting traction, where they're looking, what's the next big thing 18 months out. And then I try to focus my team on looking at that and doing research to figure out like where are the issues that we have to figure out how to address around that technology, that language, that method of deployment.
Yeah, I agree. I think number one for me would be, if you've got the opportunity to do it, it's talent, right? Hire, find someone, even if it's bringing someone from the dev organization, someone that's been there and done it. I mean, that's always the go-to for me. As a good leader, we're people leaders, right? So find someone who can plug the gaps that you don't have. To your point, Ben, the second thing I would say, if you don't have the opportunity to hire, go get it from dev. I mean, those guys know it day in, day out. Go speak to them, learn from them. They know the answers, right? They just don't want to tell the horrible security guy about it. So if you go and build relationships and learn from them, there's a really strong two-way process there. We're all after the same thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I don't know why we can't all just get on.
Why can't we all get along?
Okay, I have one more question from Kyle. Kyle, you should be able to talk.
We find often that hiring is a big challenge in information security with the talent shortage. How does hiring in application security compare to other roles in Infosec? And, are there challenges that you guys are seeing out there?
Really expensive.
Yeah. Everybody in cyber is expensive. AppSec's one of the ones that's particularly expensive, and you have to find somebody who's, again, gets back to, I think, the answer to a lot of things we talked about here. It's relevance to your organization, right? So you might find out that person who's really relevant to your org is super expensive because he's in high demand everywhere, right? And I think, just one of the things I would highlight back is, with everything going on right now in COVID, I think companies are looking for opportunities to save. I think it's a bad thing to try to save by down leveling or making the salary offer more cost relevant now than it needs to be in 6 months, right? Because that person is inevitably going to leave, and I think that's a bad decision. I think we got to be really sensitive in the Infosec area, how we make those hiring challenges, make sure that you're hiring somebody who's right for the org, and then offer them the right money for that position.
Sarag, I'm interested if you've got any, does your tool or what you do you see that helping with the talent shortage? Do you see the need for AppSec people depleting because your tool's so good, or how does that work?
So I think about it in two ways, right? Like, one is technology can help, and that's a big part. Like, for us, how do we give you better cost, our total ROI on an investment? This is where you don't have to hire 20 people to run a tool, right? Like, again, the fleet truck tire pressure analogy I gave earlier. If you can now have one person sitting at a desk monitoring 5,000 trucks across the world, it's much less people required than if you have 5,000 truck drivers checking their tire pressure every single day or trying to check their tire pressure. So I think you can actually solve some of that. You can help the problem in many ways through better technology or more different approaches. But beyond that, I think the second piece, we talked a lot about this from a developer standpoint. If we can help developers themselves or writing the code be more efficient by education and training in a contextual way, we don't need a whole lot of very specialized security experts that sit in a back room and review shitty data to distill the right findings back to the development team, right?
Empowerment, man, empower.
Yeah, that's right.
Absolutely. And I apologize for me, not being a good job as a moderator ourselves. it's 3 past the hour, but it's what I found, and I've been selling and delivering application security to my customers for over to 20 years, and I found that I wish I could say it's a silver bullet, but it's not. But one of the things I do like about Contrast is the ability to continually test. And I'm a big fan, even when like 2000, 2001, when Bruce Snyder said security is a process, not a product. I wish he had added, or a service, because nothing should be one time. It should be built in. It should be continuous. That is what Contrast has built. But I love the fact that even folks within Contrast have said, Corey, we're not everything to everybody. We don't work with every single, version of code or, all the different apps. We work in specific areas, which most of them will continue to grow. But I love that message, because you still need an expert to kind of guide that program. And you want to be building in, burst sweep type tools, manual testing, plus, contrast. The solution needs to be a combination. And what Contrast has done is it's the first step, it's an important step of building in, the continuity that cybersecurity needs within the AppSec program. And I'll let you, Sarah, kind of finish off with, more about Contrast, but that's how we partnered with you guys, and it's just been a great partnership so far. So I thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. And I look, I think we've talked a lot about it, but at its core, our goal is, we have a thesis. Like in our thesis in the company, you may see some people in our company talk about this. Is like modern software, whether that's process like Agile DevOps, whether that's architecture like microservice APIs, or maybe it's even the way you deploy like PaaS or cloud native or whatever it might be, just requires a modern software security model. That's kind of our thesis and our premise, and that's what we're building for. So, we've built a lot. Our goal is to actually displace and be a foundational platform for AppSec in the areas where we work, and that's kind of the platform. So there's a bunch of materials here where you can read up a little bit more, but of course, reach out to Corey or us, and we're happy to give you more context on what we're up to the contract.
Awesome. Okay, Terry, anything else that I forgot?
Just a couple of things to wrap up here. If you want more information on Contrast Security, I have put that information in the chat pane. You can see that up on the screen. And also next week is our last in the series on continuous security validation. So Attack IQ will be joining us for that. And last of all, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us. There's a couple of ways to get to us, as well as our LinkedIn profile and our Twitter. So thanks everybody for joining. Any wrap-up things?
No, that's it. Again, thank you. Again, heated conversation over, wine or tea. I appreciate all of our panelists. This has been fantastic. And again, we'll talk again next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you all. That was great.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.